Okay, the subcommittee will reconvene, and Ms. DeGette.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to echo Mr. Dingell's thanks to every single witness here for working with us on this legislation. All of your input has been very, very important, and none of you will be surprised to know I want to talk about the mandatory recall provisions of the bill. And I want to start with Ms. DeWall. First of all, do you think, Ms. DeWall, that the current provisions of the Bioterrorism Act are sufficient to give us the mandatory recall that we need in a robust food safety system?
No, I don't.
And why is that?
Well, the Bioterrorism Act actually didn't really give them mandatory recall, but it does give them the authority to take certain actions, like administrative detention and some other actions, when they meet a very high...
But to interrupt you, it really has the one step back and one step up. Is that sufficient to give us the whole traceability? I said mandatory recall, and I meant traceability.
Okay, I'm sorry. Traceability...
so that's what happens when you break my train of thought.
Thank you for that clarification. The one step up and one step back traceability was a good first step into this area, but I think the provisions in this bill are much improved on that. What we've seen over the years since that law was passed is that the FDA itself has had trouble with identifying food products involved in major recalls and outbreaks.
Because it just doesn't go far enough forward or backwards, correct?
Right.
And Dr. Jones, you're nodding your head yes as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's such a huge food production chain that if there is one point in the chain where records aren't good, you
lose the whole
if
thing.
Bruno's produce doesn't know where it came from, you could have the rest of the industry know, and you can't get anywhere.
Thank you. Now, I want to ask you, Mr. Ambrosio, Ms. Bailey, and Mr. Stenzel, I've read all of your testimony and listened to you here today. You don't object in general to the concept of traceability, do you, Mr. Ambrosio?
No.
Ms. Bailey?
No.
And Mr. Stenzel?
No, ma'am.
And in fact, Mr. Ambrosio, in your testimony, you recommended that the Secretary be allowed to design systems based on the information gathered and not be mandated to develop a specific type of system prior to those efforts, correct? And Ms. Bailey, in your testimony, your written testimony, you talked about the concept of including intermediate distributors and brokers in the labeling of bulk ingredients, the supplier, so that we could get that traceability, correct?
That's right, yes.
And Mr. Stenzel, I've got to say, the produce industry in this country was really... maybe I shouldn't say this in front of everybody else, but you folks were the ones that gave me courage to believe that we could do traceability because you're doing such a great job. So I want to commend you. I guess the issue, as I heard in all of your testimony today, is some concerns with the specific language of Section 7 of the committee draft. Would that be accurate to say, Ms. Bailey?
That's right.
And I just want to... you talked in your verbal testimony today about the tomato recall, and you were talking about mandatory versus voluntary recalls, but that made me think about traceability too, because it doesn't really matter if the recall is mandatory or voluntary. If it's overbroad, it's still, well, I guess I should ask you, Mr. Stenzel, since it's produce, if it's overbroad, it still devastates the entire market, correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
So really what you want to have is the ability to quickly trace where contamination came from foods, correct? And what we've been seeing lately, I was thinking about the latest, the pistachios, where they were saying just don't eat any pistachios. Then I thought, well, what if you had pistachios that were incorporated in granola or something like that went along the way? You could really devastate a food agency. Ms. Bailey, I wonder if you want to comment on that.
I think, first of all, we are absolutely sympathetic with your goal and the importance of improving our traceability systems. I think it's a matter of prioritizing how we go about it. That's why we recommended, first of all, there's a difference between a single product like a strawberry or that is ready to eat versus ingredients that may be commingled and mixed
Right.
into additional products.
Exactly right.
And we saw in the peanut paste problem that when there were brokers involved, PCA would sell the paste to a broker who would then sell it to an end manufacturer. And that's why we included the recommendation that
Right.
that distributor label it. Now going forward, what we have learned working with our member companies in other areas of the food industry, it can be enormously expensive when you start to deal with commingled ingredient and commodity products. And that's where we caution, and we think the legislation has it absolutely right. Let's ask FDA to first
Right.
identify cost benefit, because in the end, resources are finite.
Right. But let me just say, because my time has expired, that I really hope all of you will come in and work with us on this particular traceability language, because from the very early days of my working on this issue, what you're saying is exactly my view, which is we need to have traceability throughout the industry, but that we can't have a one-size-fits-all traceability system or technology. The key is those things be interoperable. So if you have peppers and tomatoes mixed in a salsa, that's one level of complexity. If you have that salsa incorporated in a processed food, that's another layer of complexity. And then if you have that put into something at a restaurant or any place, that's another layer. So we have to really work on that. What I'm amazed about, though, is we do have the technology, and we just need to work on it. So I hope you'll all work with us in the next week to improve this language. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Boyer.
I've had to take a deep breath because Mr. Matheson and I guess now Chairman Dingell and Gene Green, you know, we've taken this trying to educate the committee here on electronic pedigree with regard to drugs. Yet now all of a sudden there's this great interest to do something expansive on pedigree with food. So I just want you to stop and ponder and think about this, Mr. Chairman, because as we move to the drug safety bill, it's the reason I went right at the FDA commissioner. You can't say I've got this level of interest in making sure that they go after tainted food, but with regard to drugs, well, maybe that's a little bit different. We're not going to send this message to the country that tainted food, bad lettuce, that's really awful. But we can have a different standard when it comes to bad Lipitor. I'm uncomfortable. Let me ask some questions because I don't think I completely understand. When I look at Section 106 and Section 107, we have sort of an all-in, and then under traceability, we have some exemptions. So I come from a very small town. I grew up on the Tippecanoe River, Buffalo, Indiana. We have 2 stop signs at either side of a bridge. That's the size of the town I come from. So I think about small businesses, and I worry. So when we think about access to records, and we're going to say requirement with regard to restaurants, are we going to include concessionaires? Does anybody anticipate that we would include concessionaires? So when you go to MCI Arena, how about when you go to the college football game? How about high school? How about Little League? You know, we make deer chili at our Little League games. I mean, what all is going to be included? How about convenience stores? How about you pull into that mom and pop gas station and they've created something? You can get elk sausage. I mean, what kind of requirements are we going to be placing, and where do we stop? Does anybody thought about? Do we, as a committee, need to have better definition as to who's in and who's out? Total silence. Yes.
Congressman, at the risk of your wrath, I just don't think that food safety is something that is determined by scale of size of company. I run a trade association that has many very small members who are going to be extremely challenged to comply with this regulation. We also have very many big members. But in last summer's outbreak, we also found that some of the issues and some of the places where people were getting sick We're the very smallest restaurants. And we've got to be able to have a system that takes care of.
Well, there's food handling. There's a difference between food processing and food handling, right?
Yes, sir.
So the people up here on this dais love to talk about all these foodborne pathogens and all these sicknesses that everybody comes down to, predominantly deals with the handling of food, right? Not so much always the processing of food at a manufactured facility. I almost feel like they're being used as a scapegoat when, in fact, it's other handling. I mean, probably everybody here in the audience and around the country, we've all gotten sick because somebody left the mayonnaise out overnight or something. Well, when I look at the traceability requirement, we decide, I guess, farms, for example, they got to keep their records, or I guess Little League has to keep their records, or everybody that's going to be involved with food is going to have to keep their records. But we're going to exempt now restaurants and farms would be required to maintain the safety records, but direct sales by farms are exempt. What about seafood? So if we're going to exempt on the farm, we going to exempt seafood? How about that trawler that goes right out there, gets the seafood, and he owns the restaurant and the trawler and processes the food? Should they be exempted just like we're going to exempt on the farm? Total silence. See, those are the same kind of questions I have. When we start picking and choosing where we draw the line, Ms. Bailey?
If I could, the language in that section at the end is very important, and I think goes to the heart of our concerns, that there are a number of questions. There has to be a sense of what's feasible technologically, what the cost benefit is, and what the relation is to food safety.
If we're going to exempt farms, should we exempt trout farms, catfish farms? How about fish caught on the Great Lakes? What about seafood?
Yeah. I think those are all questions that need to be answered. And if I could offer, the analogy might be this is very similar to electronic medical records in that it is a concept that makes good sense, but it is not easy to achieve, and there are many reasons why it's not easy to achieve, both technologically and cost-wise.
See, it is easier for me to be able to achieve electronic pedigree in the drug industry when I have specific companies, yet I can't get cooperation here to do this, but they say that what I'm trying to do is too complex. What the heck is this? This is a decentralized model of the umpteenth degree. I'd love to work with you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you. Okay, we're done with our questioning, and just a reminder again, you heard us earlier about that you may get written questions by the close of business tomorrow, and we'd like you to answer them by the close of business on Monday. And again, I want to thank you all. This was very helpful. I can't emphasize enough that even though, our plan is to go to markup next week, that we would very much like, and we intend to, consider a lot of the statements that were made today as we move forward over the next week. And several members have commented on how valuable, your testimony is going to be as we move forward. But without objection, the meeting of the subcommittee is adjourned. Thank you.